Hello everybody, this is Politics with Avi and I'm Avi. Once again, we will be discussing political culture, and once again, some of the topics will be pertaining to Russia. So as I said in the previous episode, if you have a problem with that, don't stay tuned in. But I would advise you to stay tuned in because the information does not only concern Russia, but basically everywhere else too. So, features of modern Russian political culture. Raising the level of political culture is a social need. This is what today's episode will be about. Let's begin. Political culture is an integral part of the general culture of mankind. Political culture refers to such a phenomenon of the people's spiritual life which has a significant impact on the most diverse aspects of its political life and on the basis of which it is possible to judge the level of political maturity of society. Political culture has been shaping for decades and even centuries. She is the result of knowledge of objective political processes and the corresponding conclusions from them. In this matter, the purposeful activity of society, its institutions, the fight against subjectivism, dogmatism, and voluntarism should play a large role. Words must correspond to deeds. Theoretical political knowledge is called upon to underlie the political activity of people, especially leaders. So what did we understand from this specific paragraph? Political culture is something that is shaped for decades and even centuries. It's not something that you do impulsively at the moment based on nothingness. Culture is always based on traditions that have to do with your history, that have to do with institutions, that have to do with subjectivism, dogmatism, and voluntarism, and of course leaders. You could not call destructive behavior a culture because it's not. Even during the times of the Persian Wars or the Byzantine Wars or the Ottoman Wars, that was not their culture. That was military involvement in different situations. Their culture had to do with the way they ate, the way they played, the way they corresponded with one another in other states, and so on and so forth. Being aggressive is not being cultured. It's being militant. And in our days, it's a very dangerous trend that could even be perceived as being a terrorist in more places than just one. So let's continue on with the subject. The concept of political culture. The concept of political culture is one of the key categories of political science. It clearly reveals that the traditions of society, the spirit of its socio-political institutions, the emotions and collective mind of its members, as well as the style and current code of conduct of its leaders, are not random products of history, but interconnected parts of a single whole that form a real existing chain of relationships. The term political culture, in the sense in which it is used in modern political science, was introduced into circulation in 1956. Gabriel Almond, 1911, in his article Comparative Systems, defined political culture as a subjective change in the social foundations of the political system, for example, as a set of individual positions and orientations of the participants in a given system as a subjective sphere that underlies political actions and attaches importance to them. The peculiarities of political culture is that it does not come down to politics as such or the political process and their actual embodiment. Having no material content, political culture is nevertheless an objective fact, which does not appear as an external reflection of some essential features of the political process, but as its organic part. It is woven into the context of existing political relations and systems of social activity. Political culture is a description of the way of existence, political behavior of a social subject, a nation, class, group, individual, a subject of the political process. Political culture not only explains the behavior and political positions of people, but also regulates how they behave. For example, the political culture of the country's population depends on how this or that conflict is resolved. Not how the conflict is started, not the conflict itself, but how the conflict is resolved. Let me underline that, very important. The political culture of the population of a particular country determines how effectively or conversely inefficiently its political system functions. Now, underline that too. With its invisible hand, political culture either contributes to the stability of the political system or, like erosion, gradually undermines and destroys it. Political culture is a complement to what happens next. So if you have good political culture, which is political culture, it could contribute to stability. If you lack political culture, if you don't have it, if it's bad, it means you don't have it. Erosion, degradation, and failure. So, the characteristic features of the subjective political culture of the Soviet type were: 1. The hierarchy of consciousness. The special role of the Communist Party state bureaucracy in the formation of this type of consciousness was due to the fact that in its hands all the fullness of economic and political power, the possibility of managing the economic and financial resources, and spiritual values were concentrated. 2. The main principle of bureaucratic consciousness was authority. In this case, the CPSU, or whatever the party was called. The gap between the declared values and the really mastered patterns of political activity contributed to the formation of double standards in public consciousness, political apathy of the population, ostentatious activism. 3. A distinctive feature of the Soviet-era political culture was the closed nature of absolutism of the political values of the working class and the complete rejection of such achievements of Western democracy that have universal significance as rule of law, principles of separation of power, human rights, civil society, etc. So, while Western society used the natural historical mechanisms of social evolution, property, inequality, economic interests, etc., which created the conditions for the formation of an individual, civil society, and the diversity of social interests, Russian society had focused on political ideological mechanisms of evolution. So, this is going to be kind of a long lecture today, but just bear with me. It'll be an interesting one. Characteristic features of the Russian political culture. Now, characteristic features of the Russian political culture at the present stage are as the following. 1. The leading dominant role of the values of communitarianism. 2. The internal schism of political culture expressed in particular in the predominance of values of the patriarchal traditionalist type. 3. Personalized perception of power. 4. Misunderstanding, underestimation of the role of representative authorities. 5. Attraction to performing functions with limited individual responsibility. And 6. The unpopularity of control over the authorities in combination with weak respect for the law, etc. For example, the collapse of the political center in Russia always leads to turmoil in society and to the collapse of the state system, which can be clearly seen from the history of Russia, the beginning of the 17th century, 1917, 1991. The restoration of power is the main prerequisite for overcoming the crisis. The choice of the kingdom of Mikhail Romanov in 1613, the victory of the Bolsheviks in the Civil War of 1918-1921, the victory of Yeltsin in the events of September-October 1993. Only with strong power can we talk about the stability of the Russian state and society. The political achievements of the Moscow princes, experts, considered the rejection of the principle of inheritance of supreme power practiced in Kievan Rus. Here, power was not owned by one or another prince, but by the whole princely family. This collectivist principle of domination and inheritance did not allow the creation of a strong state. The Bolshevik dictatorship, in essence, combined the principles of literalism with an autocratic tradition. All attempts to reduce the collective leadership ended in complete failure. Only at the head of an unlimited ruler did the Soviet political system gain high efficiency. But unlike the autocratic system, the communist system failed to create a mechanism for the transfer of power. In the political culture of Russia, the central role is played by individuals, people, not institutions. Power is personified by one person. This is one of the foundations of the stability of Russian political culture. The special character of Russian culture was largely predetermined by the split in Russian culture that followed as a result of the reforms undertaken by Peter the Great when he decided to break everything through the knee and enter Russia into the European house. It was an attempt to change the mentality itself, that is, to change the nation. The most important event was the split into two main subcultures. The Petrine transformation split Moscow Russia into two worlds, into two types of civilizations of subcultures. The fact of this split, its significance was to some extent realized by Russian political thought in the 19th century. The split of society into two main subcultures, the warehouse of the Russian life of the peasantry and the warehouse of Russian life, which included the Europeanized tops of Russia, aristocracy, bureaucracy, the nobility, and some other social groups, are something characteristic only for Russia. The originality of this split has become one of the main motives of Russian political thought. Until today, the political culture of Russia is characterized by the depth of the split into two subcultures. According to one of the modern Russian political scientists, the differences between subcultures are sometimes so striking, the gap between them is so great that some observers may give the impression that two nations coexist in Russia, united by almost nothing but a common language and territory. The task of forming a modern civil society in Russia presupposes, first of all, overcoming this split and creating a more civil political culture, more uniform in its basic characteristics. Now, in order to comprehend this, it's very important to revise what political culture and its structural elements are. So, political culture, historically sustainable. Political representations, beliefs, orientations, as well as the models and norms of political behavior of people resulting from them, styles of activity of political institutions. As an essence, we can distinguish a few very important points. The degree of knowledge and use by citizens of civil rights. The degree of understanding and implementation by the masses of the state policy. The degree of inclusion of citizens in the political life of society. The degree of development of political institutions and the participation of the masses in them. The presentation of democratic foundations for the implementation of state policy. Forms and methods of functioning of political institutions, accumulated socio-political experience, existing political traditions and customs, the style and methods of of communication of political actors and political processes, the validity of the preparation and efficiency of the implementation of political decisions. I hope you guys understood that, because these are some very important points. Now let's go forward to the structure. Culture of political consciousness is structured in this manner. Political attitudes, political views and beliefs, and political traditions, customs, and norms. Culture of political behavior is the culture of political participation, culture of political activity. The culture of functioning of political institutions is the culture of making and implementing political decisions, culture of the electoral process, the culture of perception and regulation of socio-political conflicts. Types of political culture. The variety of types of political culture is due to manifold regimes of political systems, the difference in the level of socio-economic, political, cultural, historic development. Political culture exists in specific forms, the same values, symbols, norms, patterns of behavior in times. Governmental, people, and social groups are manifested in different ways. The theory of political culture types based on the determined basic model of political culture, which is manifested in the national specific forms. The scale of release overall dominant political culture. This is the most stable, typical of the signs that characterize the political consciousness and political behavior of the general population and subculture. Aggregate political organizations and models of political behavior. All that characterized for some political groups and regions and different from dominant in society. It includes orientation, social class, national ethnic, religious, political, age and gender, regional. In relation to allocate power and dominant contraculture, a set of symbols, values, norms, and of samples where behavior is opposing and dominant in the culture. Fame gain typology. American Schijnheidsverba and political scientist G. Almond speak of it. It is based on the results that comparative analysis of political cultures in different countries, depending on the orientation of people to participate in political life and operation of political systems.